Tired of your phone bill supporting who knows what? iCatholic Mobile is a 5G provider that supports what matters to you. With iCatholic Mobile, every call, text, and even that group chat you can't escape helps support the Station of the Cross. It's a network that connects you to what's good for both your soul and your wallet. More information is available at iCatholicMobile.com. iCatholic Mobile underwrites with the Station of the Cross.
Solution to soft priests in a soft church and more. Today on The Simple Truth, we consecrate everything to the Sacred Heart of Jesus through the Immaculate Heart of Mary and the pure, strong, chaste heart of St. Joseph. I'm your host, Jim Havens, and our guest today is Kevin Wells, Catholic husband and father, best-selling author of several books, including The Priests We Need to Save the Church and Coached by the Cure, Lessons in Shepherding with St. John Vianney. You can also learn more about Kevin and his good work over at kevinwells.org. Kevin should be with us here momentarily, and so I'm excited to get to speak with Kevin today and also have him share some of his recent articles, some good ones, all focused on the virtuous example of some holy priests, 3 to be exact. We're going to go through them, and there's going to be a lot there, I think, for all of us to learn from, but especially for anybody who is called to the vocation of priesthood. We need to have these models. We need to have these models before our eyes, what it means to be a real priest. And this is not just for those who are called to the priesthood, but the ministerial priesthood, but for all of us, and especially men, I would say, living out our vocations. We need to have these examples of faithful men living out their vocations before our eyes, reminding us who we are, what we're called to. And again, we're blessed to have Kevin Wells with us. So I do see him there. Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Kevin, how are you today?
Hey, Jim, it's so good to be on with you again. Great to be in.
Yeah, great blessing to have you here. And before we dive in, I do want to encourage folks, if you are listening if you enjoy listening to The Simple Truth and the other great shows that are broadcast on the Station of the Cross, please support our 2025 appeal, our fall appeal. There are many easy ways to donate. Simply return the envelope from our recent mailing or go to thestationofthecross.com or use the iCatholic Radio mobile app. You can also call in your pledge weekdays, 8 to 5 p.m. Eastern at 1-877-711-8500. Thank you for your generous support. All right, Kevin, let's go to this most recent article. You just put it out. CrisisMagazine.com published this article yesterday, highlighting the example of Father Michael Champagne, if I'm saying it correctly. It's called Occasion Priest and the Acadian Solution to Soft Priests in a Soft Church. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so you came close, Jim. It's champagne, and I'm not going to say it in the Cajun, brogue, but he's got a husky Cajun brogue. This Father Champagne. So I have heard, for some reason, I've made quite a few friends in Louisiana. And I've heard over the past several years, folks say, "Wells, you got to come down for the procession on the Bayou Teche, and you got to meet Father Champagne." And essentially, before I get into Father Champagne and yesterday's Peace in Crisis, so what's a Eucharistic procession on the Bayou Teche? So the Bayou Teche is about a 125-mile waterway that runs through the deep south of Louisiana. This waterway's been around since before the time of Christ. And it was Father Champagne's idea 10, 11, 12 years ago to process Jesus down the bayou where he knew many hundreds of Louisianans who had either fallen away for the faith, or they were rock-ribbed Baptists or Protestants or just anti-papists. He knew that a procession of boats, the bell boat, the thurible boat with the incenser, the Jesus Christ held high in the Eucharist, and 70, 80, 90 trailing boats of adorers might pierce these bayou dwellers who lived on the banks of the bayou in a way that maybe they just hadn't been pierced. And so he began this, I think it was 11 years ago he began it, and he began to understand that, yes, people were so moved by this procession that many had come back to the faith they had abandoned, and many converts were made of Protestants. And And the idea was this, I'll just throw this in, Jim, really quick. Of course, he wanted to process Jesus and hold him up high in a public way, sort of an unconventional way, a typical kind of Louisiana Cajun way. But he also wanted to memorialize what the Acadians did. So the Acadians were the Nova Scotians in the mid to late 1700s who refused to kiss the British king's ring when they said, you either leave the Catholic faith of your French roots, your roots in France, or you will be imprisoned, persecuted, or will murder you. And so many died martyrs in Nova Scotia, Newfoundland. They're called the Acadians. So they finally fled because they were not going to leave the Catholic faith, and many of them sort of matriculated down this bayou, the Bayou Teche, and they settled. These Canadians settled in the bayou, and they've never left. They've probably been thinking the British ever since. Man, I'm glad you kicked us out. We like it down here. So Father Champan's idea was, let Cajuns remember that if they're truly a Cajun, they're Catholic. You can't be a Cajun and not be a Catholic tethered to your roots. So it was both the memorialization of the history from 250 years ago, but also a way to process Jesus down the bayou, and man, has it worked.
Yeah, incredible. Yeah, and there's something, if you, for those who have gotten to know anyone that does live down in that area, in the bayou of Louisiana, what a culture. I mean, there is something so distinctive and so vibrantly family about the culture, just incredible. And it makes sense that it's flowing from the sense of Catholic culture, and that there is really a beautiful virtues that flourish. I've not spent time down there myself, but in my encounters with the people that are from that area, always very, very impressive to me. And so we get this example. You paint this portrait of Father Champan in the article that is great, and the images that you describe about this Eucharistic procession, the boats going up through this trek that they take, and the people coming out and encountering Jesus there in the Holy Eucharist, in the monstrance, in the third boat, and all of this, very striking. But then you get to the heart of it, into the man himself. You write here in one portion that he is as Cajun gets, a man close to Father Champan said, but God had put a stamp on his heart from the beginning of time. He would be a priest who gave God everything, and one who would listen at his feet in adoration. It has been during his daily holy hour, or often hours, that the multi-layered plagues afflicting both society and the Catholic Church have pressed upon his heart. Much of the disorder and malformed consciences of today, he believes, has run unabated because of comfort and softness in the priesthood and church. Tell us more about Father Champan and this sense that he has, this conviction that he shared.
Yeah, well, there's something to it. So, Jim, I don't say this. I beg you and beg your listener to not hear it as self-glorification, but a writer very, very rarely writes an article that really gets out there. And today, this article has gone viral. Like, I rarely can say that. Like, a writer wants his stuff to be read, but I don't know if I've ever written an article of the, I don't know, thousands I've written that has been more read by this article. So why? It's certainly not because of me. I lack talent to do Father Champan justice, but I think it's been shared widely throughout America and even outside of America because laity hunger for men like Father Champan. So who is Father Champan? Father Champan was born in the Bayou back in the early 1960s, and he was born in a family of 9 brothers and sisters who were raised to work hard, get up at 5, work on the family farm, get your books, go to school, do your homework, come back out and go to the farm. We're going to end each night by praying the rosary. So if you walk by the Champan house around 7:30, 8 o'clock at night, you could hear the muffled sound of the rosary being prayed by a family of 11 with the parents. So he grew up being mantled by Mary and understood what work ethic was. So early on, it was kind of baked in the cake, in that Cajun way, to be a hard worker, but also one who would give all he could, not only to the farm, but to God. So it really wasn't a surprise after he graduated with I think it was a mechanical engineering degree, that he wanted to give himself over to God, and where he felt it was needed was with the poor. So he set up shop, this order of his called the Order of Jesus Crucified, the Community of Jesus Crucified. They're in one of the poorest communities in America. We'll just say in Louisiana, in the Bayou, in St. Martinville, and I spent some time there last week. And this is a place where you'll hear gunfire at night and verbal fights, etc. And he said, "Yeah, this is Calcutta. This is where I want to be." So I think people are drawn to heroes today because maybe they just don't see enough of them out there.
Yeah, Kevin Wells is with us again. His most recent article is entitled "Occasion Priest and the Acadian Solution to Soft Priests in a Soft Church," and talking about Father Michael Champagne, who is at the center featured in this article. And we're going to get back to it with more when we get back. Especially, we're going to get to, I think, what is the very heart of this article, at least as I see it, where Father Champagne says the following: "The problem with so many clergy today is not chastity, it's worldliness." So we're going to unpack that. What does that mean? You can't have men defending your country who are soft. It goes on from there. We'll be right back. This newest article, Kevin sharing, getting a big response today and yesterday since it was published. Occasion Priest and the Acadian Solution to Soft Priests in a Soft Church. We're talking about the man who this article is being featured in this article, Father Michael Champagne of the Bayou of Louisiana, and we left off with talking about him in the way that he serves the poor. It is stated very beautifully in the article as follows: "Because Father Champagne has detached from the world and built his life on devoted prayer, daily adoration and rosaries and stiff penances and self-denials, he sees the poor with the clarity shaped by the cross. To him they are Christ himself, starving for love in the same way Mother Teresa saw it. And so each day, through his toil, sacrifices, and love for them, he and his community share their stigmata. They bear the same sweat, grime, and dust of the suffering poor." A man who has known him since before he entered a seminary, said of him, "When I think of him, I think of how good God is." That's a great testimony there. And so, Kevin, I want you to share more about it and then connect it to this really at the crux of everything here in this article, which I believe is a quote from Father Champagne saying, "The problem with so many clergy today is not chastity, it's worldliness. You can't have men defending your country who are soft, and you can't have men in collars defending souls who you think are soft. There must be a cost. Redeeming the world means stepping into it and taking it on." And we can hear this and receive this when we hear it and receive it from an example of someone who's really, truly day-to-day striving to live it to the full, which we have here, by all accounts, Father Michael Champagne. Please share with us more, Kevin.
Yeah, this could be answered so many different ways, Jim, but I'll just start by saying I really do believe that Father Champagne wants to honor what's in his bloodstream, and that is the memory of his Cajun forebears. He knows that they suffered, they were murdered, they endured all sorts of unconscionable pains because they loved their Catholic faith. So that was sort of, he was raised to understand the stories of the Cajuns who escaped Nova Scotia. So ever since he was a little child, he understood that there was a cost. As you mentioned, Jim, what you read, just like Mother Teresa and all the great saints, they understood that love really wasn't love unless there was a cost or sacrifice involved. And he had grown up with this. So I won't go into all of the remarkable sort of machinations of his priesthood, but if you came down to the Cajun land and just kind of spent a week with the folks in the Bayou, they would line up for hours to talk about this priest, Father Champagne. I mean, he would hate it because he's such a humble man. But he's not only hardworking, he's brilliant. He's theologically textured. He speaks 4 languages. When he gives a mission or talk, thousands come out. But he's just a humble Cajun man who understands that the burden of everything that he is to try his best to resemble Christ, who spent his life suffering to love us, even to the end, bleeding out to redeem us from the cross. And that's all he really is. He's just another priest in a long line of saint-like priests who knows that any type of, let's say, ceding to a comfort or something that will detract from his identity to be a shepherd to the poor or to parishioners or to whoever he's around, well, that's like a demon. Like any kind of comfort in his life is like a demon. So in a very quiet way, unnoticed way, he fights it off like it's Satan. So really, he's conformed his life to be streamlined for God alone. That was an expression the church used to say, priests and religious would live for God alone. I would say that Father Champagne lives for God alone. And when you do that, when you make that decision, you find yourself waking up each day, pouring yourself out. Now, I'll say this, because he's just a man, he's not a divine being, he's tethered intensely to prayer. So he makes at least 1 or 2 holy hours a day, prays the office with his community 5 times a day. As you mentioned earlier, Jim, he mortifies his body. There's self-denials. There's implementations into his life and his community's life that enable him to pour himself out. And I think he understands that comfort blurs, comfort softens. And I think if you gave him a truth serum, he would say, and what has happened to our church? We become far, far, far too comfortable. Matter of fact, we become soft. And that's why we see polls like we saw last month out of Notre Dame, that 9 out of every 10 Catholics raised today will leave the Catholic faith, many of them becoming nuns. And Father Champagne says, in his Cajun way, not on my watch. So that's his life. That's his priesthood.
Wow. And you mentioned Notre Dame. It brings to mind what you mentioned in the article about him being an adjunct professor at Notre Dame Seminary with a curriculum vitae that could hold its own against any cleric in the country. So yeah, what a mix of abilities, really incredible. And so whatever our abilities are, whether they are, whether we have a high aptitude for things or a low one, we give it all to God. That is we want to get our end right, to put our end, have the right end in order, which is God alone, as you mentioned. And this goes for priests, but it goes for all of us. We are called to put Christ at the very center. And so what a great example we have here. Again, you can read all about it in this article from Kevin Wells, crisismagazine.com. You can also probably get there by going to Kevin's website as well, kevinwells.org. But yeah, this line, just to unpack it a little bit further, it caught my attention because the problem with so many clergy today is not chastity. Right there, that catches the attention because that is a pretty big problem, it seems, today, not just with clergy, but with society at large, in and out of the church, sadly. But when you think about it and you say that the deeper problem is worldliness, it's worldliness, which is the biggest problem, because that really, if those who are struggling with unchastity, I would imagine at root of it is what you're going to find, which is this worldliness, this sense of not seeing, not doing what you point to with respect to Father Champagne, which is to look at comfort and to look at softness as the enemy, as a temptation to be shunned. It's a very different way of looking at things than the way that the world holds out. So instead of what the world might say is, let's figure out how to best position ourselves to have maximum comfort. What's the hack to feel most comfortable in this situation or that situation? It's actually the exact opposite for those that truly want to follow Christ. It's not about our comfort. It's about offering ourselves in and love, and comfort actually is a temptation that can get in the way of that, which again you illustrate so well and so strongly with the example of Father Champagne. Anything else on this you want to share with us?
I think you said it well, Jim. I think the church has failed. I would say, I think it's fair to say, and the church might say the same thing. It's failed over the past, let's say, half century, maybe coming up with new programmatic ideas, new ways of presenting CCD, a synod on synodality, whatever. It's another thought, another log on the fire that might stimulate hearts, stir hearts to want to love Jesus more. And as we mentioned earlier, as that poll shows, it's failed miserably. All of it has failed miserably. And Father Champagne says, well, sure, he kind of shrugs his shoulders and says, well, no, I just, how about we just live like Jesus? So that bracelet from 25 years ago, that kind of had it right, WWJD, that kind of had it right. But how about we just live as Jesus lived? And that's what Father Champagne does. So he lives uncomfortably. He serves relentlessly, as the gospel book says plainly. Jesus poured himself out to the poor and lonely and abandoned. So he doesn't play the game of what would Jesus do? Because let's be frank now, Jim, there's many Catholics in the church today that would say Jesus would say, yeah, go ahead and do that if it makes you feel good, even though we know it's intrinsically disordered, and we could extrapolate on a lot of that. But Father Champagne just says, no, I will read the gospel and I will listen to Mary, who I've consecrated my priesthood to, and I'll give it my best shot. I'm only a man, but I'm going to live as Jesus lived. So he kind of cuts out all the programs and just says, go to the poor. Jesus went to the poor. I'll go to the poor, and I'll go to troubled souls, and I will preach prophetically because Jesus did that. So he's just living as Jesus lived.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah. And this, all of the priests that we're going to talk about today, they have this in common. And really, again, it's something we all ought to have in common, which is it's the simple truth, right? To receive what God has poured out of himself for us, all that God has revealed to us through Jesus and his Catholic Church, to humbly receive it as the gift that it is, and then to say yes and to strive to live it, and to be honest about that, and to really dive in. And so, again, with all of these priests that we're going to talk about, these great examples from our time living among us right now, you're going to see the same things that you see through all of the examples of holiness of old, all the saints of old. You're going to see Eucharistic adoration. You're going to see Our Lady. You're going to see penance. You're going to see love poured out for the poor, for those that are most vulnerable, most in need. And so let's go to the next priest we're going to talk about today. This is another wonderful example, not one that is an example of softness by any means, just the opposite, and that's Father John Hollowell. And this article, The Miracle That Grew from the Ashes of 2018, Kevin, you published this, crisismagazine.com, April 16th of this year. Tell us the story here about Father Hollowell.
I've come to believe it to be one of the most remarkable stories in the past several decades of what can happen when a priest makes the decision to dive so deeply into the abused and the hurt and the abandoned and those that are suicidal that he almost died himself. So he took on something that was ugly, in the muck, in the mud, and said, I'm going anyway. And because he did, he almost died.
All right, that tees it up well for us. We're going to be back from the break and get right back to Kevin to unpack this story for us. It's incredible. And if you are buying or selling a home, there's an easy way to help the Station of the Cross at the same time. Real Estate for Life has 1,400 experienced, morally grounded agents in the U.S. and Canada. Visit realestateforlife.org to find a Christ-centered, experienced realtor near you. And don't forget to mention the Station of the Cross. We're going to be right back with Catholic writer Kevin Wells. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today, Kevin Wells, kevinwells.org. We're talking now about his article at crisismagazine.com from April 16th, The Miracle That Grew from the Ashes of 2018. In that article, Kevin, you write that the story of Father Hollowell shines like a blaze of light cutting across a Bethlehem night sky. Please share some of that story with us now.
Sure. So who's Father John Hollowell? He was an athlete born in a large family, just like Father Champagne in Indiana, raised by a good Catholic family. They're all his siblings are practicing Catholics today, just like Father Champagne's, and became a priest right at the time of the scandals in 2002. So he might have been scratching his head right away. He was seen as, are you one of those guys? And so it wasn't a good way to sort of be baptized into the priesthood. But he was a good man, a holy man, and people saw it right away. So he actually became a fairly well-known priest in Indiana. He had a very popular blog where he addressed some of the problems in the church. He's very smart. He's very wise. He's a prayerful man. His patron saint is St. John of the Cross, which tells you something. He's very prayerful. But he was at confession in 2018, and somebody broke open a waterfall of being abused by a priest. And after this penitent left his confessional, Father Hollowell found himself weeping. All these memories were sort of coming back, and then obviously the scandals came out from 2018, and they're all back in his face again. And then a year later, he was diagnosed with cancer in his brain, and he thought to himself back then, Lord, so I have to go in for surgery, and I'm probably going to get pretty serious radiation and chemo. This is a serious cancer. So he thought, what do I do? How do I offer this up? And he said, I know what I'm going to do. I know what I'll do. He said, Lord, let me be their cross. So who is there? There is all the suicidal, the drug addicts, the male prostitutes, the thousands upon thousands that have fallen away from the faith because they were sexually abused by priests. He said, let me be their cross. And Lord, why don't you nail their wounds that they carry? Why don't you nail their wounds to my body? So as I have my brain surgery and deal with the fallout and the pain and all the radiation and chemo, let me take all their pain with me. So he wrote a letter, an email, and asked for the names of people that were abused by clergy. And one by one, he began to get emails. I think in total, 188 emails, phone calls. A few people visited him saying, we understand that you want to speak to us about what happened to us. And Father Hollowell, who's a very holy and humble man, said, yes, please tell me your story, because I want to bring it into my surgery. I want to give it to God and ask God to heal you, because I know you're suffering. And so that began to happen. And as he went into the hospital, he had all those names with him, sort of thumbtacked to the wall. And that's when the guillotine came down. Within about 6 to 8 months, he ended up having 3 brain surgeries, one that was paralyzingly painful, where they had to take a big part of his skull out and to put in an iron plate, which is still there. Infections, chemo, just brutal. He was in hell. But he said, God, I offer this for the abused. So, Lord, thank you. Thank you for letting me endure this pain. But I'll just finish here, Jim, and I'll let you pick up. I don't think he knew what God was going to do with someone who offered themselves as a victim. So he wanted to become a victim. So God said, okay, you want to be their victim, John? Then you will. And you ask to have their pains crucified to your body. Well, guess what? You own them now. And after his 3rd surgery, he began to take on the manifestations of the sexually abused, where he became depressed, angry, suicidal, almost became addicted to the pain pills. His best friends, his family, he said, I don't want to see you. He felt a darkness from God that, of course, the abused felt. So he had entered the rings of hell of the sexually abused, because why? He asked God for it. He wanted to take their pain. So that's what he had to survive. And it was a long process. He was going through panic attacks, anxiety attacks, all of these. He was an athlete. He never suffered from any of these issues. prior to the surgeries. But all of a sudden, he found himself living like one of the abused. So I'll stop there, Jim. And I don't know if you want to pick up the baton to kind of tell the listener where this all led.
Well, no, I just want to say we're talking with Kevin Wells, kevinwells.org. And then, I want to kick it right back to you. We're all on the edge of our seats wanting to know what happened next. I mean, the only question that comes to mind is, did he have an awareness of this, that this, what was so unusual, these sufferings that he was taking on, that were becoming his own, that he had never had before? Was there an awareness that he knew what these were and what they were, that they were very distinctly him carrying the sufferings of others, and then was that able then to give him sort of that freedom and that power to really offer them, rather than to get really overwhelmed by them?
So, as I mentioned, Father Hollowell is very smart. So he knew exactly what was happening. However, in his humanity, and I know I've experienced this in my own issues that I've had physically, sometimes when you're in the midst of the violence of pain, you can offer your pain up for one of my children or for a friend who I know is going through a divorce. But as you're going through it, you don't want it. Like, you want it off of you. And he was going through that. So he still offered the suicidal thoughts, the panic attacks, all of the horrors to God. He still was in the game, I'll say, but he didn't want it anymore. He didn't know that the sledgehammer was going to come down this hard, but God allowed it. And but yes, to answer your question, Jim, yeah, he knew exactly what was happening.
Sure. So yeah, please continue on. What happened next? So
this is the miracle. This is why I consider this to be one of the greatest stories of our times, and I hope it's more well known. So finally, this crucifixion of his life passed. He began to heal. He returned back to ministry. He became sort of old Father John again, and he was getting his feet back together, and things were good. And all of a sudden, what happens in, I think it was 2023? Well, the brain cancer comes back, and his neurosurgeons, his doctor said, John, no surgery this time, but we need to put you on chemotherapy and radiation right now. So Father Hollowell said, well, you know what? I've lived a pretty good life. And he's a young man. He's probably in his mid 40s right now. He's an athlete. And he said, you know, I'm pretty happy as it is. If I die, I die, but I don't want to do radiation and chemotherapy. If God wants to take me, then God can take me. I'm fine with that. And they said, John, are you sure? Because this is going to grow. And yeah, I am sure. So I think most people respected Father Hollowell for this decision. They understood it. And Father Hollowell, obviously being a priest who understands the power of the supernatural, understood that a miracle could happen. So, he prayed for a miracle and of healing. And in the meantime, he would just go on as a priest. Well, somebody mentioned to him, Father Hollowell, you've always had a devotion to Mary. Why don't you go off to Lourdes and why don't you pray for a healing over there? And Father Hollowell is kind of like yeah, why not? That's a good idea. I should have thought of that. So he took off on a one-man pilgrimage to Lourdes and spent about a week there, and it was a very prayerful time. And obviously he drank and was blessed with the healing waters, and very holy week alone with Mary and this brain cancer. Nobody knew who he was. He was all alone, and came back to Indiana. And about 2 weeks in, a few parishioners came up to him at different times saying, hey, you look good, John. You got some color back on your face. Or, hey, John, you got sort of a step to you now. You sort of got a pep to your step. And you got some, and John's like, yeah, I'm feeling pretty good. And so he went in for for an appointment, his scheduled appointment, I guess 2 or 3 weeks later. And the doctor was flabbergasted. He said, it's gone. And Father Hollowell said, what do you mean? He's like, the cancer, it's not there anymore. And it doesn't make sense. And Father Hollowell said, well, God is good, but yeah, why don't you come back in 2 weeks? Come back. And so he went back a few weeks later, and his oncologist said, it's all gone. You no longer have cancer. So the way I see it, Jim, is this. Sometimes I think Mary, our great, the great lady, our lady, says to her son, hey, Jesus, this one right here, this is the victim. This is the one that offered his body for the victims of sexual abuse. And he was in Lourdes, and he believed in my power here. Hey, Jesus, I've handpicked this one, John Hollowell. Will you heal him? Will you give him a miracle? And I don't know the way heaven works, but I know the way victimhood works by Jesus and what he did to redeem all of us on the cross, and what John Hollowell endured to try and redeem these haunted victims of sexual abuse. So something tells me Jesus nodded, because for the past 2.5 years, Father Hollowell gives all of his reports, his ontological reports, his cancer reports, his scans, his anything from his doctors to a medical panel in Lourdes. And he travels to Lourdes once a year, where they right now are in the midst of studying what could be and what seems to be on the road to be the first ever declared miracle of an American that went to Lourdes. And he seems to be, he's on the road to being the next confirmed miracle of Lourdes, France. And if you think about it, if you kind of pull back from this story and you sort of see what he took on and the man that he is, I don't think it would really stun anybody to say, yeah, you know what? This one makes sense. This miracle makes sense.
Yeah, truly incredible. And Kevin, when you step back and ponder all of this, what is your main takeaway? What do you think is the message in terms of the application for us in our lives? What are we to take away from this? What's the main message you think for us and really for the world as well?
Well, Jim, you're probably more like Clint Eastwood and John Wayne and Iron Man than I am, but we're never going to be, I don't think, a hero in the way that Father John Hollowell and Father Champagne are. But we can use them as models to say, again, if there's not a cost to how I love my wife, my spouse, my children, my neighbor, and really become a victim for them, the way Father Hollowell became a victim, the abused, and Father Champagne does for the poor, then are we really living out our Catholic faith if we're not embracing hard things? So I would think for the man and the woman out there who might be listening, if we take on these little pinpricks, these costs, and die to ourselves, that we're sort of emulating not only these two priests, but Jesus Christ.
Yeah, very well said. Kevin Wells is with us, and we've got one more segment to go. We're going to bring you one other story as well. But look, we've already got these opportunities all around us in our lives to offer up the sufferings that we face, to do the good, and to offer up the sufferings that we have to go through to do that. Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today, Kevin Wells, kevinwells.org. We can also find his great articles over at crisismagazine.com, those we are talking about today, and this next one we're going to get to in just a moment. But first, I do want to encourage all to remember iCatholic Mobile, the only Catholic mobile phone company in the U.S. today. When you subscribe to iCatholic Mobile, you do help fund the Station of the Cross. Check out iCatholic Mobile, iCatholicMobile.com. All right, let's get to this last article today. Vianney, Plump, and Meyer, Indiana's miracle men, knowing he could not simply keep doing what had been done, a young priest tried something different, an imitation of something old. So here we turn to learn about Father Jonathan Meyer. Kevin, please share with us this story about Father Meyer.
Well, he's an explosion from the very beginning. He came out of the birth canal, an explosion of joy. And when you combine his stallion out of a barn energy with a love for arguably the greatest priest saint in the history of the world, St. John Vianney, and a love for the priesthood, well, you're going to get something. And Father Jonathan Meyer is really something. He's modeled his life after St. John Vianney, who, for your listener who might not be aware, he was canonized in 1925, and in 1929 he was Actually this year is the 100th year anniversary of his canonization. But in 29, he was held up by Pope Pius XI as the model for all parish priests, the patron saint of parish priests. So he's not really talked about anymore. And maybe it's another podcast of why he's not. I think he's been sort of shoved away behind rectory closets because I think maybe today he's regarded as too much of a priest. And you can't let that guy out of a closet, because you let Vianney out of the closet, a memory of Vianney out of the closet, you're going to be doing some work. But John Vianney has not only been let out of the closet by Father Meyer. Father Meyer has actually made a replica of his bedroom, of John Vianney's bedroom in 19th century Ars, France. He just wants to do everything Vianney did because why? Father Meyer wants to be a canonized saint. He wants to lead tens of thousands of souls to heaven. Why? Because his hero did. John Vianney did. So that's what Father Meyer wants to do.
Well, that sounds like a pretty good way to go. Share with us more about what that actually means, and as you wrote this article, what you found and what you highlighted.
Well, Father Meyer was put to the test in 2013, where he was a very well-known priest back then just because of his magnanimity, his enthusiasm, just a good priest. And he was sent by his bishop to close down 4 old parishes, beautiful parishes out in the countryside of Dearborn County, Indiana. And so people out there saw him as the hatchet man, and they hated him. They didn't like him. They were like, "Oh, you're here to close us down. We can't stand you." And so poor Father Meyer, he's put in a bad situation. So he just began to listen to their lamentations, their pain, their agony. And after a while, he said, "Well, what would St. John Vianney do?" And because John Vianney arguably was the greatest listener in the history of the world, why? So why was John Vianney perhaps the greatest listener in the history of the world? Because he listened to people 14 hours a day, every day in his confessional. So Father Meyer listened to these people, and he went back to the chancery and he asked his bishop, "Hey, listen, would you please consider allowing me to be imaginative and try and keep these 4 parishes open and make them one?" And so the bishop essentially gave him a year with this experiment. And candidly, most priests in the diocese thought it was stupid. They thought it was myopic, egocentric, not to just close them down like the bishop said. But Father Meyer said, "No, let's try and do something creative." So he went back. So what does Father Meyer do to be creative? Well, he says, "Well, what would Father Vianney do? What would St. Vianney do?" And that's what he did. He took the blueprint of St. John Vianney for the next year. He opened up a perpetual adoration chapel because he knew St. John Vianney adored Jesus in the monstrance. He made all-night vigil back in 1818, 1819, 1820, Ars, France. What did he do? He began to take on severe penances and mortifications. Why? Because that's what St. John Vianney did. He began to consecrate everyone in his parish to Mary. Why? Because that's what St. John Vianney did in Ars, where there's still a locket around a statue of Mary in Ars, France, in the parish that still exists, with all of the parishioners' name from Ars, France, around the early 1800s. What did Father Meyer do that Father Vianney did? He began to visit all the homes in his diocese to hear them out, to hear what they wanted, and invite them in to try and make this experiment work. So as John Vianney knew that things that were stale and normal were toxic, when the church was falling apart in the aftermath of the French Revolution, John Vianney said, "I got to be a saint. I got to do things never done before, or at least try to kind of win back this community of Ars." Well, not only did he win back Ars, but he won back hundreds of thousands in the guillotine ruined France after the revolution. So in that year, because he acted as St. John Vianney, he not only saved the 4 parishes, but a few years later, he added on 3 more. So now he is the co-pastor of all 7 Catholic parishes of Dearborn County, Indiana, and where he had 300 parishioners when he took over, the number has more than quadrupled, almost 5 times as much, to I think it's 2,300 parishioners now. Why? Because the people of Dearborn County, Indiana knew they had a pastor and Father Jonathan Meyer, who loved them and saved their parishes and brought them all together as one.
Incredible. Again, folks can find this article over at crisismagazine.com. Vianney, Plump, and Meyer, Indiana's Miracle Men. And this part of the article, when you write the following: alone in his rectory at night when Father Meyer prayed and reflected on the tide of his parishioners' pain, Vianney kept emerging like shafts of variegated light. Father Meyer saw him on the winter day in 1818 when he knelt in his empty parish church for the first time and offered God a prayer that has echoed through the ages. My God, grant me the conversion of my parish. I am willing to suffer all my life, whatever it may please you to lay upon me. Yes, even for 100 years, I am prepared to endure the sharpest pains. Only let my people be converted. So is that an actual quote? We have that actual historical quote from St. John Vianney offering himself in this way in this empty parish church in 1818. Is that right?
That's the first thing he said in ours. It's quoted by what they say is the best biography on his book by Abbe Truchot. Yeah, that was his first prayer on that lonely day when he entered his spiritually dead town. And, Jim, you reading that quote, do we see the theme that runs through this whole interview from Father Champagne, Father Hollowell, and Father Meyer? They all said, Lord, give me a cross. Like, let me run to the cross. Let me embrace the cross, because I know it's in doing this for my people, for the poor, for the abused, for the churches about to shut down. Lord, I know if I take it on that maybe you'll do something good with it. So that's why I keep trying to find these stories out there and show, I guess, write about them so folks can see, yeah, man, we got some paragons out there.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your work, Kevin Wells. kevinwells.org is where you can find him and his good work. And, just absolutely amazing. Love of God, love of neighbor, but truly, sincerely striving to live that out, right? And so this is the gospel alive. We see it in these examples that are put before us today that Kevin has shared with us. Let us be encouraged. Let us go forward and be like these men. Kevin, thank you so much. God bless you all.